Welcome everyone to the first session of the 2018 Global Azure Boot Camp here in Melbourne. How many people have been to a previous boot camp? Okay, a few. A lot of new people, looks like. So this event it started, I think the first one was in Auckland, already started, and it goes for the next almost 24 hours as it goes around the world. So the session I'm going to present today is an overview of Azure hybrid integration tools. So basically, since it was the first session, I think it worked pretty well of just going through all the different tools that are available to us and what's changed recently and some of the new tools, things like that. My name is Bill Chesnut. I'm a cloud platform and API evangelist for 6Pivot. I'm based in Melbourne. 6Pivot is based out of Brisbane. So here are our global sponsors, local sponsors. So thanks very much for AGL for providing the venue. That makes it a whole lot easier when you get a venue. So a few of my details, I've got this slide a little bit later on so that we can look at that. So what I want to cover in hybrid integration is I want to cover Service Bus. I want to cover Event Grid. How many of you have heard of Event Grid? Okay, a few people. API management, logic apps, Azure functions, and on-premise data gateway. My background, as most people know, has been integration for about the last, since 2001, 2002, I've been a BizTalk person. Lately, I'm doing about half and half BizTalk, half Azure type stuff. And the big difference that a lot of people are finding when they go to Azure is it's not just one tool anymore. So with BizTalk was really easy. You just put BizTalk in. BizTalk did most everything that you needed to do. Had some latency issues that sometimes you needed to use a little WCF. But with Azure, it's a bunch of different tools that you need to put together. And I think that's a little bit confusing to a lot of people. The good news that came out just yesterday in the US is that the Logic Apps is now in the leading quadrant of Gartner for the integration tools, so which is a good thing. So, but again, what I want to do is I want to cover, not in depth a lot. I know there is there's another Azure function session a little bit later on, but I'm just going to give you kind of some of the highlights and some of the places to look so that when you go to put your integration strategy together, you can find the pieces that you need. And you know that it is a combination of things. So a little bit more on hybrid integration. This is the good question, is will everything be in the cloud? So probably not. There's still going to be stuff scattered around. There's still going to be stuff that you need to get to. Some of the bigger organizations, they are putting a lot of stuff in the cloud, but there's still large data warehouses and things like that people are still keeping on premises. There's still bits of data they want to keep on premises. There's still, I work a lot in the logistics space. There's still a lot of stuff that they're keeping in their warehouses and things like that you have to get to. So there will be, and it's probably going to be a lot on premises and a little in the cloud to start with, and then you're going to see that shift. I've been real impressed this last week and a half. I've been trying to get rid of some of the data I've got stored on hard disks laying around my house. And with my fiber to the node end-to-end connection, I've pushed about 3 terabytes of data up to Azure, which has been fairly impressive, and that's been about 10 days. So it's been going pretty hard. So that's been good. But I did notice the other day that the storage guys are working on other ways of getting your data to Azure. So they had the one offering where it was a big disk unit they shipped to you. They're actually looking at some smaller options of hard drives and things like that you can ship to them and get that loaded to your storage account. So if you do need to get that large quantities of stuff there. So maybe eventually it'll be in the cloud. I'm lucky I work for 6Pivot and we have no infrastructure except Azure, which is really good. What we're going to start with is and it's Service Bus. And the reason I decided to start with Service Bus is it's kind of the glue that holds a lot of these pieces together. It's the tool that we can use to basically do asynchronous communications. So if I need to get something from on-premises to the cloud, or from the cloud to on-premises, I can use Service Bus to do that. The only thing that kind of stumbles a few people is the fact that the size of the messages. There is a limit on the messages. I'm working in the logistics space. The message size tends to be a problem because I'll get big order files and big purchase orders and things like that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into how we can fix that. But the nice thing is if you've used things like MSMQ or MQ series, all of those messaging queues, Service Bus is the same. Guaranteed delivery. You can check, you've got the dead letter queues, all of that kind of stuff. You can do some fancy stuff with convoys and sessions to get multiple messages in the same payload. What I recommend on that is we spend a little bit more time with that second item, the claim check pattern. And what it is that I will get a message in the cloud that's big. I will drop it into a storage account. I will send a very small message in Service Bus. Then on premises, I will then open that small message, get the URL to the cloud storage, go grab the file, bring it down, do my processing. If I need to send a big file back up, I do the same thing. I drop it into a storage account, small message on the Service Bus. And I found out Friday from the Service Bus PM at Microsoft is there's already been a NuGet extension added to the Service Bus client to support claim check. So there's actually one out there now that you can download as part of the NuGet package that will support that claim check. But if you've got small messages, you can basically just push them through Service Bus. And then basically have anything you want to on-premise, any code base that you want, being able to send and receive those messages. And in the cloud, we're going to see that the other hybrid integration tools we're going to talk about today have support for Service Bus. So we've got a lot of that. And the big thing that it solves that the other tools don't at the moment is that pub-sub architecture. If people are familiar with BizTalk, where you could receive a message in BizTalk and as many people as you wanted to be interested in that, the pub-sub of with topics and subscriptions in Service Bus is the way we do that. So basically, I'm going to do some short demos in between each one of the topics. So what we've got here is that I've got a dashboard set up with a bunch of things for this. So I've got a Service Bus namespace that I created. So that's basically what I have to do to start with is a Service Bus namespace, which lets me create topics and queues. And the big difference between queues and topics is queue has one sender, one receiver. A topic has one sender and as many receivers as you need. So basically you create that via subscription. I did some work for one of the pizza chains probably about 3-4 years ago. And we needed to send a status message to all 500 stores. So we could have a topic with a subscription with 500 different stores. And what we could do is by using the subscription logic in there to filter out the messages, we said if store number equals their store number or store number equal all. So that means that if I needed to send a message to every store, I drop it in that topic and it would go to all the stores. If I needed to send a message to a particular store, I would have a property on the message that set that store number to their store number. They would receive that message. And you could do any level of that. It uses a SQL 92 syntax for that allows you to do. So what I'll do quickly is I will show you just a couple of quick samples of code around sending messages to the Service Bus. And then a little bit later on, when we get into some of the other technologies, we'll see how we can receive those messages. And I decided that I hadn't played with .NET Core, so it was time to write a little app with .NET Core. So I basically have a bit of .NET Core. How's that read from the back? Is that too small or is that reasonable? Okay. Huh? Too small? Okay. So let me just see if I've got. But what I'll do is I'll make all the code samples, and we're not going to dig that deep into the code anyway. So basically, just a very simple thing is there's already a NuGet package out there for the service bus messaging. So basically, you've got to do a connection string, which basically gives you the URL to get to the service bus, and it gives you your security token. And then basically, we can go through there and we just do create whatever message body we want, and we basically just do a send async, which gives us basically the messages. If I run this, we'll see that this little example sends 10 messages up to service bus into a queue. With that other work I was doing, we got to the point where we could send 500 messages in 15 seconds. And we were working on getting that a little bit quicker. That was back also in the time that we were actually overrunning the .NET SDK. And you can see if we do take it actually, I've got a logic app out there that's actually receiving those messages, but we can go look at that when we get to the logic app. So basically we can go, normally you'll see if there's a messages setting in there, you'll see them there. Topic is the same way. The only difference with the topic is that we want to do let me just close. In the topic one, the big difference is that we want to have some properties in the message. Now, here's a good thing for a lot of people that have data that they don't want to see, for people to see. The payload of the service bus message can be encrypted. By default, it is stored encrypted at rest in the service bus engine itself. But if you want to, the payload is a stream of bytes. You can put anything you want to. You can deserialize a .NET class into the payload. You can make it JSON. You can make it XML. You can basically do anything you want to with it. The only thing that will be seen is that in this example here, I'm basically setting a property that says that it's a key value pair. It says GIB 2018. Then I can use in my subscription, I can put a query that says where GIB equals 2018, and that gets delivered to that subscription. So with a queue, you don't really have to worry about properties that much, but with a topic, the whole idea is to be able to fan it out to multiple subscriptions, so you're going to need properties to do that. And that's basically how simple it is to add the property to that. Let me hop back to the slides. Now, this is one of the new ones, and this is one of the things that I think is really going to change the way that people do a lot of things. It's called Event Grid. And I've been pestering the program manager for the last month about why it's not in Australia yet. It's being rolled out at the moment. There are some data centers that are constrained on availability of resources. So and I think that might slow it down a little bit in Australia. So the event grid stuff that I'm doing today is all out of Singapore. So, and I've been doing integration now for about 20 years. And this is my kind of mantra, polling is evil. Because basically, it uses a lot of resources in your environment for very little work. Because if you think about, if I've got something where I'm getting a message in once a day, I may be checking every 5 minutes to see if that message is there. And with some of the Azure technologies, you are paying, it's a consumption-based model, but you're actually paying for each one of those times you go check. So what Event Grid has done is basically it's an eventing-based model, and you can listen for that event. And it's basically a very simple thing. It's a webhook. So you set up a webhook. When an event happens, you will get a JSON payload about that event in your webhook. Now, the best thing about it is that we're already used to that kind of programming model. Because if you think about somebody hits a button on a website, it comes in as an event, runs some code. Even Windows Forms, it's an event. Somebody clicks a button. So we're used to writing that eventing code. And the thing is that most of the time, the events are going to be created for us automatically. But the other good thing they've done is they've actually exposed it to where you can create your own events. So if you have an application that you want to put into Azure and you want to scale it, you can create your own events. You have one piece that may be the UI. Somebody will say, okay, I want to run this report or something like that. You could push that in and out as an event, have a bunch of different things listing for that event. And also, again, you can do that. If you do an update and you've got 10 people that are interested in that update, they could all subscribe to that event and they could process it however they want to process it. So here is what they've got currently in terms of event generators and event consumers. So the nice one that I'll demo is blob storage. So if you create, update, or delete a blob on blob storage, you can get an event that tells you what happened and you can do something. So in the logistics world, what I'm working on right now is FTP, drop it into a storage account, and then that'll kick off a logic app, do some processing, send it down on premise for some additional processing, going into a warehouse management system, out of a warehouse management system, back to blob storage. The Azure subscription, this is neat if you're in the situation where you have to manage your spend in Azure. You want to see what people are doing to your subscription. You can get a event notification from when they create, delete resources. The same with resource group. It's just at a little bit lower level. They've done it for event hubs, IoT hubs. They're working on the service bus one, but that's an interesting one. What they're going to do for service bus is that it's going to be, if you don't have a listener on that queue or on that subscription, you can set a event grid that it will notify you that there's a message on that queue, and then you can start up a listener. But if you have a listener running, you will not get an event, because they figure you're already listening to that. The big one down there, too, is I can create my own topics. So I can push my own data into Event Grid. The consumers we have already is we've got Azure Functions. We have Logic Apps. We have Azure Automation. So that automation could go along with your Azure subscription. As people create things, you could automatically do things. You could do things like if they create a virtual machine, you can have an automation script that goes out and sets up the, if it's a developer one, automatically goes and sets up the auto shutdown. Things like that. Webhook, so basically you write your own code and you can register that endpoint into as a consumer, and then also event hubs. So that's the ones that are out there at the moment. From the MVP Summit, the word has gone down from on high that all things in Azure will generate events. So we just have to see how long it takes them for all of those things to generate events. Some of them that are going to be interesting are Cosmos DB and SQL. So similar to triggering type events for a database. So that's going to be interesting to see how they come along. So basically, let's go out and have a look of how we hook up event grids. Oh, wrong one. Let's go here. So what I'm going to do first is go to my storage account. So I've got and this is a V2 storage account. And if you've already got a storage account that's maybe in the Southeast Australia region, you won't have this tab. But if you look over here, you'll see there is an event grid tab there now to set up event grid. So if you go look at that, so what you'll see is that I have a logic app set up as that consumer of that event. Now, the nice thing is the logic app set all this up for me. So basically, I go in and I can tell logic apps that I want to listen to an event, and it gives me a drop down and says, okay, what subscription, what producer, and what kind of events that I want from that. So what I can do is now I just go back to the overview on my storage account. I'm going to go to blob storage. And I've got a container out there. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to delete that. I've already uploaded it a minute ago, and I'm going to delete it now. And then if I go out here to my logic app, the logic app that's activated, and basically there is, at 7:46 this morning, there's where I did the upload. So we'll go look at that real quick. Actually, what I'll do is I'll show you in code. This is the event that I got for that blob being uploaded. So you'll see that it's a put blob. It gives me the file name so that I can go do whatever I want to with that file name. And I've got, so all of the events look similar to this. You will have that wrapper about the connection and the host and things like that, and then you will have a body of some sort. So if you're creating your own custom events, you would have your own custom JSON body there for that. And with the logic apps, it knows that it actually parses these JSON out, and it'll get that URL. So you will get an event in the logic app that says, I've received that a storage event's happened, and then if I want to download it or I want to upload it, I can basically use that URL to then send that to grab the contents of that message. If we go back into Logic Apps and we look at that second event, we'll see here that it's showing me that, and let's go in here and look at the raw output. And you'll see that this is a delete blob. So I can manage look at how I'm managing that storage there. And basically, I went into my Logic app, which we'll look at in another topic, went in there, set up the event grid connection to that storage account, and then now I get an event. I can look at the file name and decide whether I need to do anything with that file. So I could have multiple Logic apps getting that event, and one does it for a .text file, one does it for a .json file, one does it for a .xml file, if I want different processing logic. Okay, back to our slides. So again, what I'm trying to do is kind of give you an overview of these tools. We're not going deep in any of them, but there are other talks that you can pick up off the internet if you want to go deep in the topics. Event Grid is changing almost weekly, so you would need to pick up a fairly fresh one. The next one I want to talk about is the one I really like too, is the API management. How many people have used API management? A couple of people. So basically, it's the way that we can publish our APIs to the world, or if it just wants to be internally, we can do the same thing. The nice thing is it's kind of secure by default. You have to have at least an API subscription key to get past the front door. You can turn that off if you really have a truly public API that you don't care who uses. But most cases you have to have at least an API key. And also you can have a nice URL. So you could have api.sixpivot.com in every single one of your APIs that you've published in your organization, even though they're running on 10 different web servers, or half of them are running on premise, the other half are running in the cloud, the other half are running in Amazon. It doesn't matter. You can have all of those published to a standard URL, and people can discover them for you there. You also have control over like the versioning. You have nice things about rate limiting. So if you're giving away, if you've got tiers of your application you're selling, you have a free tier, they can do 10 calls a minute. You can do all of that without touching your code. You can implement that purely in API management. They also have versioning now. So you can have different versions of your API, and they could literally be pointing to different implementations of your API. So different web server, anything like that that you want to do. So, and the one thing that they've done well is that they have a developer portal that people can sign up for to get access to your APIs. You can control how they get access to that developer portal through a lot of different methods. But basically, it gives them the ability to actually test right there in the developer portal, run your API, see what the inputs look like, see what the outputs look like. Also, it's got the ability to generate code in a bunch of different ways. So me not being a phone developer and somebody wants to call my API from Objective-C, I'm lost trying to figure that out. But in API management, there is a little tab there that says Objective-C to call this API. And it shows them the code that they need to call that. I was doing a project in Brisbane with API management. We had a developer that was running inside of, what was it? It was one of the, I can't remember it now, but they needed JavaScript. So basically, went to the tab, grabbed the JavaScript, sent it to him in an email. Even though he could see it in the developer portal, he just didn't realize it was there. Sent him that, and within an hour, he was up and going, calling those APIs. So the components of API management are basically the authentication. It's got some built-in authentication, but it also supports things like OAuth. So if you've got an OAuth 2 provider out there, so Azure AD, or any other, we used a couple of projects. We used Identity Server 3. So plug that in. The caching, so like you can say that when this particular API is called, if it's called with the same parameters, I want to cache that request for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Really good if they're calling your API to fill in drop-down lists and things like that on a website. Quotas, so that you can say, okay, I want to let them call 10 a minute, or over a day period, I only want them to make 100 calls. So I can control all of that. And I can also, in API management, it's got a product. And I can set up a starter product and an unlimited product, and they can have different quotas, different rate limiting. I can also, they've replaced, when they originally had the product, they had another website that was a publisher portal. They've now replaced that all with the Azure portal. And I can import the WSDL, I can import a Swagger, or I can go in and create it directly. Now, the interesting thing that they've done is that we've also got a set of policies behind this that I can control what happens to the input, how that input is reformatted to call to the back end, and then when the response comes back from the back end, I can reformat that. So what this means is, one of the nice things is my API looks like X at the moment, but my goal is to make it look like Y. So I can expose Y through API management, manipulate the payload as it goes through API management, call the X service in the back, bring that back, manipulate it back to what the Y return wants to look like. So I can be ahead of the game, even though the code's not there. The other thing it does implement in policies is mocking. So if the phone developers want to get started yesterday, and I've still got at least 2 weeks worth of code to do, I can mock the responses out. And I can either have just a schema-based mock, or I can do a little bit of code. Early on, I actually called off to an Azure function and used some technology called Mockaroo to generate the right classes coming back. And also, in the publisher portal, you can test it also. So as the administrator of this API, you can make sure it's working inside the publisher portal. So you can actually put the parameters in, call it, things like that. They've got the same thing for the developer portal, sample code, and testing in the developer portal. So a couple of the features that I really want to stress is that policies. The policies let you do pretty much anything you want to. They've got a bunch of pre-canned policies that you can use. That's like the rate limiting and the quotas. Now, the other thing they've done is they now support SOAP pass-through. So why would you want to expose your old-style WCF service or something like that through API management? To have that one central point of control. Everything that's going into my back end is coming through API management. And I'm controlling it. Now, the next one is the really one that saves a lot of people, REST to SOAP. You've got an old-style SOAP service sitting in your on-premise data center. You've got somebody that wants to call it from an iPhone, and they want REST. It basically uses a language called Liquid to map between the REST request and the SOAP, sends the SOAP to the back end, gets a response back, maps it back to the REST. And you've got control of what that mapping looks like in the policy. And the other interesting thing that people struggle a little bit with in Azure is static IP. The instance of API management has a static IP. So if your customer needs you to call them their web service with a static IP, you can actually publish their web service in API management, call to it through API management, and you get a static IP address they can whitelist. So makes it really neat for that. Versioning, you can start off, your API might not have versioning, and you can add versioning to it with API management, and that supports versioning in the header, in the query string, and in the URL. So pretty much any way you want to do it, and it can be any format of versioning. So if you notice the Azure APIs, Microsoft uses a date stamp as a version, but you can do V1, V2, V3, V4, whatever you'd like to do in that. One of the things they also lit up as part of versioning is revisioning. So if I publish that API today, and then I publish it again this afternoon, that'll create a revision, and I can make a decision of whether I want to make that latest revision the active one. So I can do the same thing I do like with website slots. I can test. I've got a special URL I can call to call that new revision. Do all the testing I want to do to make sure it's exactly what I think it is before I make it live, before all the consumers hit it. So let's go out here and have a look at API management. I've got too many things that start with GIV. So basically what we have here in API management, we start basically at the APIs. And this gives us the tools to import our Swagger. And again, all of this has got PowerShell commands to go along with it or API commands to go along with it, so you can put it in a full-blown CI/CD pipeline also. You'll see I can, if I'm just creating a blank API, So I've got these three operations I need to define for my phone developers. I can go out and actually hand code these to get them started. So open API specification. This threw me at first because I always knew it was Swagger, but that's what it's called, open API specification. Then I can use also do Waddle, and I can do WSDL. And the WSDL, this is the one where I've got a choice here of whether I do a SOAP pass-through or SOAP to REST. And it will automatically generate the transformations for me. And I also have logic apps. So if anybody's tried to call a logic app through its HTTP, there's this really long, ugly security token that you have to throw on the end of the URL. You can actually use API management to get rid of that and basically have it exposed here. API apps, just the basically straight API apps, and also an Azure function. So a function app can be in here. We're just going to have a little bit of a play real quickly with the Echo API. You get this one by default, and you get a set of operations in there. And basically we've got I'll open this up. And what I can do is I can go here and retrieve a resource. So that shows me my retrieve operation. And there's what the front end does. There's what the inbound processing. There's what the back end does. I can look at some settings about where it's at. But then I also can hit the button to say test. And I'll pick retrieve resources. And then basically, you'll see that it, because I've got a subscription to this API, it automatically fills in my API subscription key, which if you look at the API subscription, I just figured out how to make it really, really small. Okay. And what I can do is I can go down here and you can look at the API key. It's just a really long string. And then I can basically hit send. And that's going to call my API. And then basically give me back all of the details about the call. And you'll notice here, I've also got a trace. So I can see how long it's taking API management to process this, and then I can also see how long it takes my back end to process this. And there's analytics around all of that. Now, what I want to do is also, there's a retrieve resources here that's also a cached retrieval. But I want to go back to the design here. And what we'll do is we'll look at this in the code editor. And what we'll see in here is we'll see that we've got a cache policy. Let me just slide these windows down a little bit. Okay, doesn't want to go. But basically what we've got here is it said on the inbound request, it basically says that we want to do caching. Look up there, and then basically once we've done the caching lookup, URL by default for this one is retrieve resources _cache. But in my backend API, there's no _cache. So what I do is I rewrite the URL. You see where it's doing that rewrite URL to make it /resources. And then in the outbound, this is where it's actually adding it to the cache. So it checks the cache on the inbound. If the cache is there and populated, it returns instantly to the caller. If it's not, it goes to the back end, comes back, populates the cache, then goes back to the caller. And there are all of these different policies over here. So you can pretty much do whatever you want to. So like there is a policy to mock the response. So again, a lot of stuff that we can do there around that. If we go now up here and look at the revisions. So right now we've only got one revision of that. So, but basically that revision is online and current. If I added another one, I could have revision 2, and I could do some testing on it because it would give me another URL, and then I could test based on that. And then what I could do also, if I wanted to, is I could add a version to this. So what I want to do is I want a path, I want V1, and I will put it in my starter product and my unlimited product, and I'll create. One of the neat things about this is now I've enabled versioning, but I still have the original one out there. So if I've got a bunch of users that are still calling it without a version in it, I implement version 1, I add some features to it, and then I tell them if they want these features, they need to call version 1. And again, basically it's copied the URLs, and if we go to the testing page, we'll see that the URL that it's calling is got the thought they showed that version in there. No. Okay. I'm not sure why that's not showing up. May not be just exactly. Okay. Oh, yeah, I hadn't hit that. So you see the version in that URL now. Okay, let's hop back to the slides. Now we want to talk a little bit about logic apps. So coming from a BizTalk background, this is as close as you get to BizTalk in the cloud, kinda. So basically, there's been a couple of different iterations. There was the BizTalk services side of things, which did a lot of the pipelines and things like that. But the logic apps, the really sweet spot it fixes too is around the mapping and transformation. So basically, you can upload your BizTalk maps and do XML to XML mapping in logic apps. It also has all the support for Edifact, X12, and AS2. So basically, it has all that support in the logic apps. So I can do partner agreements and all that kind of stuff to be able to process that. And the good thing is I've got a lot of clients that want to get rid of that processing on premises and move it up to the cloud, get it out of AS2 and X12 and Edifact, and then bring it down just as either an XML or a JSON document. And the other big thing is it's got connectivity to just about heaps of things. Now the last time I saw the slide, the writing was so small that you couldn't see all of the systems that it supported. So it's going to hop into a demo pretty quick with that. So if we go back here to our logic apps, we'll have a quick look at our storage one. And you'll see that's run a couple of times. But what we want to do is go into the Logic App Designer. Again, there's also a Logic Apps Designer available for Visual Studio 17 so that you can design them inside of. Because really, if you look at the code view of this, it's a JSON file. So you remember this was that storage one. So basically when a resource event occurs, so basically that just gives me the event. And then basically I can go in here and I can add either an action, so doing something else. I can add some conditions. I can add a switch case, a for each, a scope, a do until, a lot of looping in there. I can add the conditions. So basically there's conditions, true and false. I'm going to get rid of that. Or then we can go in here, and if we add a new action, then we start seeing the list of all of the different actions that we can add. So some of the common ones are at the top: Service Bus, SQL, Functions, Office 365 support, blob storage, text analytics. But you'll see here there's Adobe, there's the AS2, API management, So basically, if you point to API management, it'll show you all the APIs that are exposed, so you can call those directly from your Logic app. Basically, we have queues, table storage, Basecamp, Blogger, Box. So basically, more things than you can think of that are in there as connectors. And again, if you don't have a connector for it and it's got a endpoint exposed as a web, you can just consume that endpoint and call it that way. Yeah, so we go all the way down to, there's a transform XML. The one nice thing they've added in the last year is variables, so you can do counts and things like that in that as you're looping through it and things like that. So if I wanted to take that file that I just, that event that I received, what I would do is go to the Azure storage, blob storage. Let's go. I want to create a blob. Let's go to the. So when I hit the blob storage, you see, let's see, delete a blob, get blob contents. So I could take that. And then basically I'd have to go create a connection. So it lists all the connections in my subscription. And let's see if I can find the one. Where'd my GIB one go to? There it is. There it is. So there's the connection name, GIB 2018. Create that connection. And then basically select the blob that I want to, and that's going to be basically, I think it's the, I think it's the subject of that. But basically that would go out there and grab that blob, and then, and then if I wanted to do is I wanted to send that blob to somebody, I could basically go here and add an Office 365 and basically send an email to someone. Save that off. Every time a blob got created, it'd grab a copy of it and send it to somebody. We're going to see that a little bit later on with one of the other tools that I want to show. But basically then we've also got application insights hooking into this, so I can get a lot of the statistics out of what's happening. And then like we saw a minute ago, I'm going to just say okay to discard that. But we saw a minute ago that we also get the good diagnostics, so we can see when it ran, and we can see which one of the steps in the Logic app actually executed. So if you had a failure in there, it'd have a red X on it, and you go look at it. You've got exception handling in there too, so if you want to do a retry, things like that is possible in there. So basically, it's a workflow engine for Azure. The reason they did away with the BizTalk services is that was really a small silo. The whole idea with Logic apps is it's across everything in Azure. You should be able to do everything in there. That's why all of the connectors are coming about, things like that. Okay, so let me hop back to the slides real quick. Now, Azure Functions. Now, the interesting thing about functions is it's the serverless piece of this, which means that there's a couple of different models you can run this in. You can run it in the consumption-based, so you pay for the CPU and memory that you use when it runs, or you can also put it inside of your app service plan. So if you've already got an application running out there. So how many people use web jobs? Okay. How many people used worker roles in the old ASM? Okay, a few people. So basically, the functions are kind of the next iteration of both of those. The functions uses the same SDK as web jobs. They are making some changes to that for languages and things like that. It has a lot of the same connectivity as we saw with Logic apps. So there's a lot of connectivity to the storage queues and functions So, and you also notice with our event grid, you can consume an event in Azure Functions the same way you can Logic Apps. And also, the big thing they're pushing now, and I think there's another topic later on, so I'm not going to go too deep in this, but there's another topic this afternoon comparing version 1 and version 2 of Azure Functions. But basically, for me, it was a really good place to run a small bit of code. So in a Logic app, unlike BizTalk used to have an expression shape that you could run code in. There's nothing in Logic apps like that. So basically what you do is you put your little bit of code in an Azure function, you call that from the Logic app, runs the code, comes back. So basically, that's what we do with functions. There's a lot of different things you can do, and again, they're containerizing functions, and they're doing an on-premise version of the functions. They're really, really doing lots of work with that, which they stole my Logic Apps guy to go do functions. If you're familiar with Jeff Holland, he was really involved in the Logic Apps early on, but he's gone over to the Azure Functions team now. We're hoping to get him on to the Integration Down Under webcast in May. So if you're interested in functions, have a look for that. So let's quickly go out. I'm almost running out of time, but let's quickly go out and have a quick look at the Azure Functions. So if I go back up here to my dashboard and go to my function apps, I really, really like the icon for function apps. And basically, what you can have in a single function app, you can have lots of different functions. So basically, here we've got 3 different ones. So we've got just a C# queue trigger. Then we've got a service bus queue trigger. And basically, if we go into that service bus queue trigger, we will see the code that I had to write to receive that message from the service bus. And actually, I didn't write any of it. I just told it I wanted to have a service bus queue. All it's doing is logging out a message that's got the queue item in it. So basically, that's that. And then basically, on the integration tab, I basically told it it's a service bus queue. I gave it my connection string. I gave it my queue name. And basically, it went off and did all of that from there. So basically, it would be up to me now to go back into that code and figure out what I want to do with the queue message. But I've got everything hooked up, and I can actually run this. And I think if I go down to the Monitor tab, we'll see. Yep, those are the runs. You remember when I queued those messages and I couldn't see them because I forgot that I had the Azure function still running out here. So basically, that brought in message number 5. So if you just look at that logging event that's out there. So again, we've got all this. There's also a toolkit to do all of this functions work inside of Visual Studio and test inside of Visual Studio. So again, a good place to put just small bits of code. And let me hop back to the slides. Again, kind of just overview of what I want to do on that. The last one I want to spend a little bit of time on. How many people have used on-premise data gateway? It was originally built for Power BI. Because basically everybody said, okay, we're running Power BI in the cloud. How do I get to my data on-premise? Now, it's got a fairly long and rich history. I'm not sure how many people know Clements Vasters from Microsoft. He initially wrote a bit of software called Port Bridge that would take any IP, any port to any port across the service bus. He was from Germany. He was living in Seattle. His wife was addicted to German TV. He had a machine sitting in Germany that was streaming the data across Port Bridge. That was the initial implementation of it. But basically what it does an outbound connection from your on-premises to the Azure Service Bus, and then whatever tool you're using, like Logic Apps, connects to it in the Service Bus. So it's all outbound connections. And basically, we've got The consumers at the moment are analysis services, Logic Apps, Power BI, Power Apps, and Flow. And basically we have SQL Server, we have SQL Analysis Server, File. So this is the interesting one. We now have a way to pick up files and drop files inside of our network. So, and again, it's you install the on-premise data gateway on the machine, and then it uses a service bus to create that on-premise data gateway. So let's have a quick look at that here. So I have the touchpad is just driving me nuts because there's not enough room up here for a mouse. Okay, so let's go back to the dashboard. You have an on-premise data gateway set up. I've got the software installed on my laptop. And then basically what I've got is I've got a folder out here, which is GIB 2018. I'm going to rename this file to 3. Copy that and put that into there. I do need to go out here real quick and enable this Logic app. So the Logic app, basically, if we go quickly and look at the Logic app, you'll see that it's got when a file is created, and that's basically connected to the on-premise data gateway, looking at C drive, GIB 2018 in one directory. And then so if we go out here to the overview of this guy now, I might have to just run the trigger. I think I've got it on a 3-minute poll, but you could set it up however you want to do that. For some reason last night I had issues with it running that quickly. But we're pretty much out of time now. Again, if you want to see a little bit more of that, just corner me. But basically, this will work for SQL. I think they're working on the Oracle connection too, so that you can basically, and in Logic Apps, all of the actions that support this will give you the ability to select, I want to use on-premise data gateway to get that. So, and that basically will go out there and be able to pull files from on-premise or put files back on-premise. So let me go back to the slides. So the whole idea with hybrid integration, it's not one simple product or service like it used to be for BizTalk on-premise. It's a combination of those. You'll have to choose which ones you need to make it work. If you're doing pub sub, you'll need to have some service bus, things like that. And again, they're moving more and more towards events. So if you're doing things where you have sporadic actions, you want to do event grid and do your own event grid for those. Because you could send something from on-premise into the cloud with an event grid event, and then it could use that on-premise data gateway to pick up the file. You wouldn't have to poll that location. You could still get to that location without using the polling. That's the schedule. Thank you very much.